Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the All Words Are Free podcast. I feel like I say that the same every time. I love it. I've really gotten to the vibe of professional podcaster. T minus the microphone or headphones. Today's episode is going to be based on the overarching topic, because I guess it's quite a varied topic, but we're going to be talking about fitness and aesthetics, how they relate to each other and also how they are different. Before we begin, we've got to do our outfit of the day. So you can see the pictures, but as a quick audio summary for those who cannot see the pictures, because I realised that not all platforms will actually show the pictures. It's only if you listen through Substack that you can actually see the photos and all the links. So if you're listening on any other sort of podcast platform, you can't see these pictures. But as a quick summary, I'm wearing a adjusted Ralph Lauren t-shirt. So it's actually a man's t-shirt that is cropped. And then I'm wearing brown trousers. The material, honestly, you get the slightest drop of water on, that's it, stained. It doesn't dry, it just stays there. And sometimes when you put it through the washer, you'd have all these watermarks. And it's like, not today, thank you. So recently they've been okay, which is good. But honestly, there was a period where I wouldn't even dare wash them because they just get some sort of mark on them. And genuinely, washing my hands when I'm wearing these trousers, it's like an Olympic event. I'm like squatting and bending and moving my legs out the way so the water doesn't go on them. It's of course not actually that extreme, but I love being dramatic. I'm very hyperbolic. I'm very hyperbolic in my sentences and my thoughts and my actions, but maybe not. I feel like my brain is not quite there yet. But it's not even the morning. Yeah. So that's the summary of the outfit. So today's episode has been inspired by a lot of things, actually. Inspired by a lot of the literature and the commentary essays and the audio that I've listened to. But it's also based on my own experiences. This is a topic quite close to my heart, in a way. The quote that has inspired or links to today's episode: taught from their infancy that beauty is woman's sceptre. Before we start, one thing I would like to highlight is that there's going to be mention of topics throughout this episode that some may find triggering or uncomfortable. If at any point you feel discomfort or you think that the episode is going to start affecting you in a negative way, then please switch it off. If that's now, please switch it off. You've clicked on it, and honestly, that's incredible. I appreciate every single person who is even bothering to look. I appreciate every single person who is supporting me by clicking on my things and liking my things. It's amazing. So my priority is your happiness, your wellness, and so if anything in this episode affects you, please switch off if you need. So to begin today's episode, I am going to, before we go more global and on the more societal level of how fitness and its links to aesthetic have infiltrated our society as a whole, I want to talk a little about my history with fitness. So I was always the chubby one, the one who wasn't enamoured with physical education. I wasn't great I was a chubby child, and there's nothing wrong with that. I was bullied when I was about 4 for my size by another child, 4 also, which is kind of sad. I think it's funny how things kind of stick with you like that. Or at least I remember being bullied. I don't remember anything that they said, but I remember it being around my weight. I was literally 4 years old. Anyway, don't get me started. But long story short, pre-puberty, I started putting on quite a bit of weight on, which is very natural. And at a certain point, I wanted to start losing weight. I had a thing where I just wanted to get fitter, but I remember being about 10 years old thinking I want to lose weight. It was always lose weight. And how awful is that there's so many children who have this, and it's so awful that a child is being indoctrinated by all of the media, the diet culture about weight loss. And it's just so sad. It's so sad. I started with these little 7-minute workouts. I did a 7-minute workout a day, and then you carry on. And that's healthy. That doing fitness and getting into things, doing 7-minute, 10-minute, whatever, 15-minute, whatever it is, workout a day, that's great. That's a really great thing to do to stay fit, or to start if you want to go on to, say, going on runs or longer workouts. But just doing 15 minutes a day, that's really good. That's amazing. And I'm not here to demonize wanting to lose weight or exercise or eating healthily. I aim to exercise and eat healthily still, no matter what we go over now in my story. For me, I think it slowly but surely became quite an addicting feeling. The praise that somebody gets when they're losing weight, that's the aesthetic side of it. It's no longer about, or in fact never was about, being healthy. It was about appearing healthy. Because when somebody is quote unquote overweight, they're automatically perceived by a large demographic in society as being unhealthy, but that is not always necessarily the case. And the inverse as well. Just because somebody appears slim or thin, that doesn't necessarily mean that they are healthy. My story, I suppose it's strange because it feels like a continuum. I can't pinpoint a particular time when things started getting more serious. I think I remember cutting out sugar. My diet slowly became more restricted until I was vegan when I was about 15. And I was vegan for about a year. And again, this is not to demonize veganism. You can be vegan and be very healthy. And my goals, per se, in fitness became more and more extreme. I do set workouts, so that's a strength workout or HIIT or anything like that. It was very muscularly and cardio demanding. It was very demanding on my body to do this every day. And then I became fixated on the idea of hitting steps. The whole 10,000 steps thing is completely arbitrary at best. And it's not a rigid goal per se. It's just a guideline for keeping healthy and active. It's essentially there to just promote people walking about and taking the stairs and getting up from the desk every half an hour, you know? I hadn't got a fitness watch for a Christmas or a birthday. I had asked for it. And I became very rigid in achieving a certain number of steps. I would run a lot or jog. I would jog while doing things. I would move while I'm eating. I would always be walking while I was eating. And it just got to the point where no matter how much I've fueled my body, to use that phrase, no matter how much I put in, I would burn it all off. It wasn't enough. I remember feeling weak, struggling to do things. I remember the pain of you'd sit down or lie down and there's just a pain, which is there isn't any fat there basically to protect your bones, protect your muscles. And it's striking because you feel very emotionally unstable, you feel very irritable, very tired. You have a very short fuse, and it's little things that will just trigger panic and there's this immense feeling of having control. And that is a key part of eating disorders in general. Having control over a particular aspect of your life. I think finding value in something like an aesthetic or showing people that you go to the gym. I always had a pride in saying, oh, I work out regularly. Oh, I go to the gym. It was like a badge of honor. And I kind of look back on that and think that's quite sad. And I say that, but then I'm here now and I can recognize it, and I can recognize, say, on that specific thing, that prideful aspect of, oh, well, I go to the gym. Like, oh, in the morning when I go to the gym. And I know why I'm expressing that, because it's the gym or fitness is seen as some status symbol, and that's what makes it so toxic, because your standing in society is something from all areas of life that you're told is the primary thing to aim for, to boost your status, to boost the more powerful, the more influential, no matter your field. And in fitness, if you get sucked in, then it's the more and the more and the more that you do that allows you to access that higher status, and being able to display that status and people recognizing it, that reinforces the message. Now, I'm not saying that people can't say, oh, you look good, or can't talk about how they go to the gym, because it's a social activity as well. It's difficult with fitness and aesthetic as a topic in general, because falling from healthy to disordered is such a blurry boundary, and it's different for different people. Tricky thing to navigate. But what I do know is that I was very, very focused on how I looked and not how I felt. And that is one of the biggest issues in the fitness industry. Actually, online you post photos So it's almost catered to the idea of aesthetic rather than the idea of health. How one feels is placed as a secondary to how you look. And if you look good, you appear good, you can fake feeling good. Nobody has to know that it's not alright. And I know that you can bury that as well. You can lie to yourself very easily. An eating disorder can lie to you very easily. You don't recognize that there's anything wrong until you hit a wall. You hit a block where you have no choice anymore. And it's funny because you know there's a point where there quite literally was not a choice. And the relief, it was so strange. The relief I felt, and just thinking, I'm so thankful that I don't have to do that anymore. The walking while I'm eating, the running or the jogging basically all of the time. I was so relieved that I didn't have to do it anymore, but nobody was telling me that I had to do it. I was telling me that I had to do it. Or the eating disorder was telling me that I had to do it. Our brains are such powerful agents. And the fact that my brain, or part of my brain or consciousness, was working against the other part. And it's so complex and it's almost unwireable. Once you've had those experiences, it's very difficult to eradicate it completely, if impossible. So even after having experience where you hit that final barrier, I still have the feelings. I still have constant food noise, or what has been termed food noise. And it's so difficult to articulate because if you haven't experienced it, it's really hard to put into words. Things like food noise. It's not an eating disorder in general. It's not something you can just snap out of. Because the hard wiring in your brain, there's a TED talk that is linked below which goes through this in a lot more detail. But there's a hard wiring in your brain that makes you fear putting anything into your body, consuming anything. It makes the food noise worse in a sense. And your brain becomes accustomed to having that fear. You consume something and then all you can think about is, oh, but did I eat the right thing? Did I eat too much? You can't switch those off. You can't switch off your mind. And it's very, very hard to care for your body when your mind is telling you to do anything else. It's really hard to get past these thoughts, and I've actually recently started reading a book by a personal trainer and influencer Alice Leving called Give Me Strength. She's written before, and in this book she talks about her own experiences with an eating disorder. And she wrote something in the introduction saying how these thoughts consume your day. And it's very true. It stifles your ability to to just enjoy life. It really does. And it's so sad. It's so awful. Because for me personally, I'll be thinking constantly about, oh, when am I going to eat next? Am I going to eat? Should I have this snack? How much was in this? How much do I still have to eat? Or maybe if I walk home, I'll feel better. But why do you feel so guilty for not walking home? And it really does consume and stifle your day. And it's funny because I have something to eat and I feel so much better. I'm like, oh my gosh, you feel great. Shocker. Somebody for the press. And I know logically, you feel better for being fed because that's what your body needs. But when I tell you it's so difficult to actually do it, sometimes I feel like you kid yourself. You think you're more forward than you actually are. My relationship with food is definitely better. It is better. But to live without the food noise would be wonderful. I like to walk into a cafe and not stare at all the food that's on offer, or have my friend invite me for lunch and not panic about where we were going to go. I can eat healthily, and of course I can eat healthily without fearing macros. I'm always macros based. I'm not very calories, I'm very macros based. Yeah. I don't know. I've kind of said a lot of thoughts, and I don't know whether it's very cohesive or coherent, but I'm busting out some Mark scheme words there. But I hope someone out there has identified with that. It's very hard to explain. So I hope that this wasn't 20 minutes of your podcast listening time wasted. So, what does society expect of us? Body trends are terrible. Generationally, even per decade, our body ideals change, and millions of people try to change with them. In the 90s, thin was in, which is a terrible rhyme, and it's all very charming on the face of it. The heroin chic movement made a lot of people question their self-worth. And then you move on to what seems to be a more accepting era, but the BBL, while embracing curvier body types, there's still a flat stomach. It's a highly unachievable for many people. Trends cycle, and so you may meet one trend one time, and then 10 years pass, 5 years pass even, and you no longer meet that ideal. And it's so awful because you don't necessarily think, one may not consciously think that they're gunning for a particular body type, but there's this subconscious messaging there. And if you don't meet the image that you're seeing in the media, how's that going to make you feel? And then there is the Ozempic issue. So with drugs, pills like Ozempic, which are meant for people with diabetes, and the ensuing shortages because people have been buying it for aesthetic reasons, is just truly dreadful, because people medically need this drug, and diet culture and fitness culture have come along and robbed those people of a medicine. And you cannot necessarily place the blame at the feet of the people who are buying it, because everyone is buying it. It's the new trend. They're being told that this will solve all their dietary issues. But a lot of the people who need it aren't getting it. And perhaps a lot of blame can rather be placed at the feet of the people who are selling it illicitly. And this is the aesthetic versus health question. Ozempic is being praised for how it aids weight loss. The diabetes side isn't focused on that much. Do we know? Is it widely known what Ozempic does in people with diabetes? Not particularly. Ozempic actually works, and it's largely prescribed to type 2 diabetics by increasing insulin production and also decreasing the production of sugars by the liver, and therefore reducing the amount of sugar in the bloodstream. In type 2 diabetes, your tissues are resistant to insulin, and so by reducing the amount of sugar within the bloodstream anyway, this will help to negate some of those effects. Notably, Ozempic is not engineered to affect weight loss and may not affect weight loss in multiple people who are treated. However, weight loss is essentially a side effect or a byproduct of taking the drug. It's important to note these sorts of things. It wasn't made as a weight loss drug and therefore has not been tested and trialled as a weight loss drug. There are a lot of risks to taking it, including high blood sugar, which can lead to an episode of hyperglycemia, which is terribly dangerous. There's also more benign per se, or milder compared to hyperglycemia, side effects like sickness and diarrhea, which are not very pleasant at all. There's also a lot of conflicting advice in diet culture, and when referring to the female realm, there is expectation to be thin, and you have to train regularly, but you can't be too muscular. Because if you're too muscular, then you're not delicate enough, or you're not weak enough to be a woman or to be classed as woman. Leaps and bounds have been made in the way of allowing women or female presenting folk or people socialized as female to move about in their femininity and to abrupt these traditional standards and these differing standards or specific standards placed on different demographics within or under the umbrella term of woman. And related to that, there is such a stigma attached to weight or, say, particular body shapes or particular body proportions. The sexualization of black women, for example, due to the natural differences in their body shapes when compared to white women, or particularly white European women, where this overall or this overarching ideal for woman is based. The white European woman is the ideal, the angel in the house, the delicate being, fragile and therefore thin. And anything opposing that is berated in some way. And skipping back slightly to trends, that's where something like the BBL trend, while extremely dangerous in its own way, was also an embrace of diverse body types. And so in that way, it was positive to us in a certain light. And this leads on to things like body positivity and that movement and body neutrality and all of these things where people are fighting back. And this is all wonderful. It truly is wonderful, and I really hope we get to a point where we can really accept our bodies and accept everyone and their bodies, and maybe just accept them for who they are, because what they look like shouldn't matter and it shouldn't morph or change our opinions. But those stereotypes are there, and they're tricky to surpass. A huge part of how we look, and fitness, our aesthetic, is linked to self-worth. As I briefly mentioned before, a lot of worth is attached to whether you exercise regularly, because if you don't, then you're lazy. Whether you look a certain way, whether you have visible muscles, or whether you have a slim waist or anything like this, whether you appear a certain way, appear in, say, an admirable light. It's been shown time and again that people are paid more attention to when they are in smaller bodies, when they are slimmer. Countless women have told of their experiences where they are spoken to more, referred to more, noticed more, that people are more polite to them. People are kinder to them when they have lost weight, or when all of those things are reversed if they put weight on. A lot of early life experiences, like my bullying, like growing up in a household as well that promotes diet culture as a general term, or where there are unhealthy ways of viewing food or exercise, that can affect a child or a person as they grow, but also one's environment in general. Parents can't protect a child from the wider world. And I think that social media has a lot to answer for. No one agent can be blamed totally on its own, but it is the collective amalgamation of all of these different things that can affect our minds to lead us to perhaps quite dark thoughts, or obsessive thoughts, or repetitive thoughts as adults. An interesting take on this topic was in an article that is linked below, posted on the Substack in a panoramic. And this was the concept of trends cycling, so that when, quote, women get too powerful, the skinny trend reemerges to keep us all too tired. Now, I think that was an interesting concept to consider, that when women get to a certain point, say, in progressions with feminist movements, that the skinny trend comes back as, say, a weapon of the male gaze, and it is sort of used as a weapon to cut us down, potentially. I think it's very intriguing. I don't think I fully agree with maybe the whole quote, to keep us all too tired, because I think that ultimately the policing of women's bodies is a permanent phenomenon. No matter what women do in, say, feminism or in progress or anything like that, there's always going to be something there to cut us back or cut that progress. And I think the natural cycling of body types is an unfortunate consequence of human dissatisfaction. There are billions of people online, and so there's naturally going to be shifts generationally or the dominant group, say on social media at a given time, things will shift, and it's just the nature of the beast. It's actually crazy that over all of those people, a particular body type becomes the absolute pinnacle of fitness and health and desire, because it's also a desirability question. But ultimately, these trends keep us in our place no matter what as women. There's always an ideal to strive for. And by achieving that, we're given a standing in society. But by striving for it, we're also putting ourselves through the push towards an ideal rather than perhaps what is best for us personally, be it better for our health, better for our mind, better for our body, better for our social life. Whatever it may be, sacrifice comes alongside the wins, perhaps. Back in ancient times even, they had a particular body type that was seen as the best. And this is really interesting because it shows that over generations and generations and generations, over hundreds of years, people haven't really changed that much. Back in the ancient times, they actually idealised athletic and balanced proportions. That was a quote. And slender youthfulness, which links to the concept of age. I have an essay on here that is linked to age called Manipulating Age, which goes into this in more detail because that is another interesting topic that we won't have time to go into now. The categorization and politicization of bodies has transcended time, pervaded human existence. It's inescapable. It's just where we place ourselves within it. In the Victorian times, it's when these ideas of self-control and laziness come into play. Because one's fitness, as we call it now, being linked to health and therefore prosperity, will also be used as fitness in terms of fitness for their job or fitness for their standing, fitness for their presence. In the Victorian times, if you were slim, you were disciplined. You had that self-control and you were not lazy, unlike people who were in larger bodies. Interestingly, as written in the Substack article that is linked below, women would carefully conceal their appetite for food in fear that it would be misconstrued as a desire for sex. It's an interesting take, you know? Whatever floats your boat, but yeah, I think it's quite interesting to see that now, say for example, restricting food can be glorified, directly linked to aesthetic, whereas then it was a very purity-driven thing for women. The idea of being virtuous or not showing your sexual desire because that is unnatural for women. It's just unbecoming of women. And so a desire for food was linked to that. Is this an origin story for concealing a desire to eat? Concealing having a smaller meal, even when you want a bit more? Having no extras? Having no dessert? And then a few decades later, you're looking at the clean plate culture. That you always had to clean your plate, that you couldn't leave anything. And that's just as harmful. I know, of course, it was linked to World War and rationing, because food was obviously extremely valuable, particularly in poorer communities. But as far as when we had relatively plenty, the clean plate culture and children who are always told to clean their plates, it can become quite a difficult thing to get over. Maybe your hunger cues are disrupted because you were always told to clean your plate. There's a lot of different strands to this fitness, aesthetic and food story, and it's a lot to go into in one episode. And I think maybe I will delve into, say, other sides of it a bit more in the future. But going back to my quote, it's a Mary Wollstonecraft quote from 1792. And doesn't that just show how long women have felt discouraged from speaking up, have felt discontent with what was expected of them? And in a vindication of the rights of woman, Wollstonecraft says that women are taught from their infancy that beauty is woman's sceptre. Beauty is used as power, or is told to women that that is their power. And if they don't have that, then what do they have? And so no wonder that while this standard still perpetuates in a modern society, just in a different way, fitness and aesthetic, we're talking skincare, we're talking makeup. How much money is made for products that support this, for industries that support this? Perhaps it's taking money from people's insecurities. Perhaps it's providing a sense of camaraderie. Perhaps it all goes so deep that there's no real way to dismantle it. But baby steps. Okay, so in this final content-led section, we're going to talk about men. The pressures in the fitness realm, as well as how one looks, are not confined to women or people who are socialised as female or are female presenting, but rather the idea of the macho male, the uber masculine per se. Standards affect men too, and it's important to consider that within this conversation, particularly with the fitness angle that I'm taking on this today, because men are often classified in a way by whether they go to the gym or not. If a man goes to a gym, he's automatically given a card to access greater privilege. Or if he looks a certain way, the idea of the six-pack, that's a lot of pressure on men and also a dangerous thing to promote, because the ultra-muscular men that we see often in films and on media, a lot of the times that is very unhealthy or even unnatural, which we're going to go on to in this little section. And it's not said that it's unnatural as well. Some men in fitness spaces may lie about the fact that they've naturally built their muscle when actually they've maybe taken something, steroids, for example. And that gives people very unrealistic expectations and pressures on themselves. So we're going to talk standards for men and give them some time in this conversation. So a video I watched extremely recently, actually, and has given me a lot of ideas for this particular section, is an audio essay by Khadija Bow, which is linked below. And the idea of online spaces and the prevalence of online spaces nowadays intensifying the pressures on men to reach a certain aesthetic is really interesting. Previously, aesthetic is perhaps not as important for men as for women. We're a binary comparison. And so men could subjectively get by even if they weren't quite as attractive as other men. However, now, because everything is extremely visual in online spaces, men have become much more aware of how they look. This links into the idea of looksmaxing, or quote looksmaxing. Now this is linked to incel culture, so the origins of this are not coming from a good place. And it's very intriguing to see how this term has been transferred to more popular culture applications when its origins were in a movement that was extremely misogynistic, extremely almost sadistic. And looksmaxing is all about, for example, emphasising the jaw, emphasising the features that you have to maximise what you are born with. So there's exercises out there to, as I say, intensify your jawline or your cheekbones or get hunter eyes. And Khadijah says this links to sexual dimorphism. The concept of masculine traits for men being more desirable and feminine traits for women being more desirable. So a feminine trait may be a small nose, a round face, as the traditional stereotypes tell us. People will lose a lot of their time, they will churn through a lot of money, and they will go to extreme lengths even to achieve a particular standard. Perhaps to a certain level, this is to do with self-worth and to feel accepted. There's also the link of, as Khadijah puts it, being part of the group and being part of a particular movement. The idea of missing out on the trend, you weren't part of it, so you couldn't be part of that community. It's an interesting concept. It's a very interesting concept, and it's almost quite sad. It pulls people to it who may not have done it otherwise. And there's also a lot of the pressures there economically. The payments for getting veneers, so people get it done in illicit ways and risk their lives. Going back to the idea of men and focusing on men, Khadijah also mentions toupees and wigs. And it's interesting to see that now it's crazy what you can get. You can get a toupee, or the word toupee has such a negative sort of image attached to it because you just imagine like the awful toupees that they used to do. But the toupees of nowadays, they just look like hair. You would never know. You have to get regular treatments, and ultimately it costs a lot of money. But Khadijah raises the idea that wigs have been worn throughout history for all men. And this links to how I mentioned ancient Greece earlier. The idea that we have always had standards. We've always had beauty, aesthetic, fitness standards. It's just that these ideals evolve into something else. And so the standards have always been there for men in a particular form. But by the hypervisibility of the internet, it adds that extra layer, and particularly regarding aesthetic, and in that, due to the muscular image that is required of men, fitness. Now there is another side to this. The current rise of the medium ugly man. It's intriguing and extremely objectifying, if I must say. Yes, I'm not sure whether objectifying men is the perfect remedy to men objectifying women, speaking in purely heterosexual terms. But in their Substack article, Michaela Jamison, it's a link below, says, and I quote, "Men are negatively affected by a looks-obsessed culture, just like the rest of us." And that is very true. And that links to everything I've just been saying. And so by placing this pressure, this aesthetic pressure on cis, white, straight men who are the dominant category per se in our society, then this trickles down to everyone else. By having men feel pressure to reach a certain aesthetic goal or a certain ideal image, their grievances, be they subconscious or not, towards that will, perhaps out of spite or by the simple concept of power dynamics, all of the minority groups or all of the groups outside of this dominant group, by simple social structure, become affected. It's an idea, and I don't know, I think it's worth considering, because ultimately, if there is an issue that transcends the most dominant group, the most powerful group, then that issue becomes overarching part of the human condition. And that's it. I'd love to hear what you guys think about this. It's a wide topic. I feel like the title I've chosen, Fitness and Aesthetic, can cover a lot of things. And I've only really scratched the surface here. I think there's definitely scope to go into some of these things in a bit more detail. I wonder whether this is something I think about a bit more in the future. I think I've got big overarching ideas at the moment, and zooming in a little bit more could be nice. I've also got Podcast Plus, which is the page on the Substack where I do little written pieces linked to the podcast as well. So perhaps we'll delve into some of these topics a little bit more in that, which I think might be quite nice, especially to get something in the written form. But yes, thank you all so much for listening. I really appreciate your support. Take care, and let's keep talking.